The dust had barely settled on the telegram when Ophelia Morgan threw her leather satchel into the back of the hired wagon, her heart pounding with equal parts determination and dread, because sick cattle meant spreading disease, and spreading disease meant an entire herd could be lost before week's end. She had seen it happen twice before in Colorado, watched strong ranchers reduced to broken men standing in empty pastures, and she would not let it happen again if her veterinary skills could prevent it. The driver, a weathered man with tobacco-stained teeth, gave her a dubious look as she climbed aboard in her practical split riding skirt and sturdy boots. But Ophelia had long since stopped caring what men thought of her unconventional profession. It was 1884, and women were not supposed to understand the complexities of animal husbandry, let alone practice veterinary medicine across the Arizona Territory. But her father had taught her everything he knew before consumption took him 3 years prior, and she had apprenticed with 2 other veterinarians since then to learn what he could not teach her. Camp Verde sprawled before them as they crested the final hill. A collection of adobe buildings and wooden structures clustered along the Verde River, surrounded by the rust-colored landscape and distant purple mountains that made Arizona Territory so breathtakingly beautiful and utterly unforgiving. The town had grown up around the old military camp, and though the fort had been abandoned 2 years earlier, the settlement continued to thrive on ranching, farming, and the stubbornness of people who refused to let the harsh land defeat them. Ophelia had received the telegram 4 days ago in Prescott, where she had been treating a farmer's prize mare for colic. The message had been brief and desperate. 20 head sick, more failing daily. Will pay triple your usual fee. Owen Harding, Broken H Ranch. She had sent a return telegram immediately, gathered her supplies, and set out the next morning. Triple the fee suggested true desperation, and the name Broken H Ranch stirred a memory from something her father had mentioned years ago. Owen Harding, if she remembered correctly, had lost his wife and infant daughter to fever 5 years past, and had thrown himself into building his ranch into one of the most successful operations in the territory. Men whispered that he worked himself and his hands from sunup to sundown, that he never smiled, never socialized in town, and lived like a ghost among the living. Ophelia had little patience for gossip, but she understood grief, understood the way it could hollow a person out and leave them going through the motions of existence without truly living. The Broken H Ranch sat another 5 miles outside of town, and the driver reluctantly agreed to take her the full distance for an extra $2. They passed through Camp Verde's Main Street, where curious faces turned to watch the young woman with the medical bag and determined expression, and then followed the well-worn trail north along the river before turning west toward the hills. The ranch appeared gradually, first as distant fencing, then as grazing cattle spread across surprisingly lush pastures fed by irrigation ditches that spoke of back-breaking labor and careful planning. The ranch house itself was a sturdy 2-story structure built of stone and timber, with a wide porch and multiple outbuildings that included a large barn, a bunkhouse, a smokehouse, and several storage sheds. Everything was meticulously maintained, fences straight and strong, buildings in good repair, but there was something austere about the place, as if beauty and comfort had been deliberately excluded in favor of pure functionality. A tall man emerged from the barn as the wagon pulled into the yard, and Ophelia knew immediately that this was Owen Harding. He stood well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of a man who did physical labor every day of his life. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and worn slightly longer than was fashionable, curling at his collar beneath his worn Stetson. He had not shaved in several days, dark stubble covering his jaw, and his clothes were dusty and stained with what looked like blood and other substances she preferred not to identify before examining the cattle. But it was his eyes that caught her attention as he approached the wagon. They were a startling shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over the mountains, and they held a depth of sorrow that made her chest tighten with unexpected sympathy. Those eyes widened slightly when he realized the veterinarian was a woman, and his steps faltered for just a moment before he continued forward. "Miss Morgan." His voice was deep and rough, as if he did not use it often for casual conversation. "Dr. Morgan, actually, though the title is courtesy rather than official since no veterinary college will admit women for formal degree programs." Ophelia climbed down from the wagon before he could offer assistance, not out of rudeness but from long habit of asserting her competence immediately. "I apprenticed with Dr. Samuel Richardson in Denver and Dr. James Whitmore in Santa Fe, and I have 8 years of practical experience treating everything from ranch cattle to cavalry horses. Your telegram said 20 head were sick 4 days ago. What is the current count?" Owen Harding blinked at her directness, and something that might have been respect flickered across his weathered face. 32, as of this morning. I have lost 4 already." The pain in his voice was palpable, not just about the financial loss, though that was surely significant, but about the animals themselves. She recognized that tone, had heard it in the voices of ranchers who truly cared for their herds rather than viewing them merely as commodities. "Show me." Ophelia retrieved her heavy medical bag from the wagon and turned to the driver. "You can leave me here. Mr. Harding will see me back to town when the work is complete." The driver looked doubtful, glancing between the stern rancher and the determined young woman, but he accepted his payment and turned the wagon around without argument. Ophelia followed Owen toward a separate pasture where the sick animals had been quarantined, noting his long stride and the way he moved with unconscious grace, despite his size and obvious exhaustion. He looked like a man who had not slept properly in days, dark circles under his eyes and lines of tension bracketing his mouth. The sick cattle presented a distressing picture. They stood with heads lowered, drool hanging from their mouths, and several had severe diarrhea staining their hindquarters. Their breathing was labored, and when Ophelia approached the nearest animal, a young heifer, the cow barely had the energy to move away. She spent the next 2 hours conducting a thorough examination of multiple animals, checking eyes, mouths, temperatures, listening to heart rates and breathing, examining the consistency and appearance of the diarrhea, and asking Owen detailed questions about when symptoms first appeared, what the cattle had been eating, whether any new animals had been introduced to the herd, and what water sources they accessed. Owen answered every question precisely, and she realized he was an observant and intelligent rancher who kept meticulous mental records of his herd's health and behavior. He had already isolated the sick animals, prevented the healthy ones from accessing the same water source where he suspected the problem originated, and had been trying to get the sick cattle to drink clean water with limited success. "I thought perhaps it was anthrax," he said quietly as she examined a particularly ill bull. "I have seen that before when I was young on my father's ranch in Texas, but the symptoms are not quite right. You are correct. This is not anthrax." Ophelia straightened, wiping her hands on a cloth she kept for that purpose. "I believe your cattle have been poisoned, but not deliberately. There is a plant called locowweed, several varieties actually, that grow throughout this region. When cattle eat it, particularly in large quantities or over an extended period, It causes exactly these symptoms: excessive salivation, diarrhea, labored breathing, weakness, and eventually death if not treated. Did you recently move this portion of your herd to new grazing land? Owen's expression shifted from worry to understanding, and then to anger directed at himself. 3 weeks ago, there is a section of the north pasture that I cleared of mesquite and wanted to let the cattle graze down the new grass growth. I walked it myself, but I was looking for obvious hazards, not specific plants. Low-cowweed often grows back aggressively after land is cleared, faster than the grass. The cattle would have eaten it readily, especially if they were hungry for fresh grazing. Ophelia set down her bag and looked at him directly. The good news is that we have caught it before the toxins caused permanent neurological damage. The bad news is that treatment will be labor-intensive and time-consuming. We need to keep them away from that pasture permanently. Provide them with clean water and encourage them to drink as much as possible to help flush the toxins from their systems, and supplement their feed with molasses and grain to keep their strength up while their bodies recover. I have brought activated charcoal that we can mix into their feed to help absorb remaining toxins, and I have several herbal tinctures that will support their liver and kidney function during recovery. Whatever it takes. Owen's voice held fierce determination. These cattle represent 5 years of careful breeding and selection. Beyond their monetary value, they are the foundation of everything I am building here. Ophelia nodded, recognizing a kindred spirit in his dedication. Then we should begin immediately. You have ranch hands who can assist. 3 permanent hands, all good men. They are out with the healthy herd right now, but I can call them in. Owen hesitated, then added, I have a spare room in the main house. You should stay here at the ranch while you are treating the cattle. It will be more efficient than riding back and forth to town, and I suspect you will want to monitor the animals frequently over the next several days. It was a practical suggestion, and Ophelia had stayed at ranches before while treating animals, though usually she lodged with the ranch hands or in a foreman's family cottage. Something in his careful tone suggested he understood the potential impropriety of a single woman staying in his house, but was hoping her professional priorities would override conventional concerns. He was right. That would be sensible. I will need to check on them every few hours initially, and I want to be available if any animals take a sudden turn. Relief crossed his face, softening the hard lines for a moment. I will have my housekeeper prepare the room. Rosa comes 3 times a week to cook and clean. She will be here tomorrow, which should satisfy propriety. They worked until well after dark, mixing the first batch of medicated feed and hauling buckets of clean water to the quarantine pasture. Owen's 3 ranch hands returned and were introduced as Miguel, a compact man in his 50s with gentle hands and a way with horses; Thomas, a young cowboy barely 20 with an easy smile and boundless energy; and Joseph, a quiet black man in his 40s who had worked for Owen since the ranch's founding and clearly served as an unofficial foreman. All 3 accepted Ophelia's presence and expertise without question, taking their cues from Owen's respectful treatment of her. By the time they finished the initial treatment preparations, Ophelia's shoulders ached and her throat was dry with thirst and dust. Owen led her to the main house, lighting lamps as they entered. The interior was as austere as the exterior, furnished with well-made but purely functional furniture, bare walls, and an atmosphere of deliberate emptiness. This was not a home. It was merely a place where a man slept and ate between work periods. Owen showed her to a small bedroom upstairs that held a narrow bed with a plain quilt, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a simple dresser. The room was clean but impersonal, like a hotel. Rosa keeps the linens fresh in all the rooms, Owen said, standing in the doorway as if uncertain whether to enter. The kitchen is downstairs. I usually just eat whatever is quick, but you are welcome to anything you find. I will wake you at dawn to check the cattle again. Mr. Harding. Ophelia set her bag on the bed and turned to face him. When did you last have a proper meal or a full night's sleep? He looked startled by the direct question. I sleep enough. That is not an answer. She crossed her arms, studying him with the same clinical assessment she had applied to his cattle. You are exhausted, and exhausted people make mistakes. We have done all we can for tonight. The medicated feed is prepared, the water is clean, and your hands can monitor the cattle through the night in shifts. You need to eat a real meal and sleep for at least 6 hours, or you will be useless tomorrow when the real work begins. Owen stared at her for a long moment, and she saw him wrestling with the ingrained habit of pushing himself beyond reasonable limits. Finally, he gave a short nod. You are right. I will see what I can find for dinner. I will cook. The words came out before Ophelia fully considered them, but once spoken, she did not take them back. You have been dealing with sick animals for days. Go wash up properly, and I will prepare something for both of us. She expected him to argue, to assert that she was here as a professional and not as a housekeeper, but instead his expression softened again, that flicker of something vulnerable breaking through his stern exterior. Thank you, Dr. Morgan. Ophelia. If we are going to be working closely together for the next week or more, formality seems unnecessarily cumbersome. Ophelia. Her name sounded different in his deep voice, almost gentle. Then you should call me Owen. She found the kitchen well stocked, evidence of the housekeeper's preparation for a busy rancher who rarely took time to actually cook. Ophelia made a simple but hearty meal of fried ham, beans, cornbread, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. She was no fancy cook, but years of living independently had taught her the basics of keeping herself fed, and she understood that men who worked physically hard needed substantial food. Owen appeared 20 minutes later, his hair damp and his face clean-shaven, and she realized with a small shock that he was actually quite handsome beneath the dust and exhaustion. He had sharp features, a strong jaw, and those remarkable eyes that seemed to see more than most people's. They ate in silence for several minutes, both too hungry for conversation, but it was a comfortable silence rather than an awkward one. Finally, Owen set down his coffee cup and looked at her directly. How did you come to be a veterinarian? It is not exactly a common profession for women. Ophelia smiled slightly. My father was a veterinarian, first in the army and then in private practice. My mother died when I was young, so he took me with him on his calls because there was no one else to watch me. I started as his assistant, handing him tools and holding animals steady, but I was curious and observant, and he began teaching me deliberately. By the time I was 16, I could handle most basic treatments myself. When he got sick, I took over his practice unofficially, with him advising from his bed. After he died, I continued the work because it was all I knew and all I wanted to do. Did people give you trouble about being a woman doing men's work? Constantly at first. Some still do. She met his eyes steadily. But animals do not care about the gender of the person treating them, only about competence and gentleness. And desperate ranchers tend to overcome their prejudices quickly when their livelihood is at stake. I let my results speak for themselves. Owen nodded slowly. I knew from your telegram responses that you knew what you were talking about. The gender did surprise me when you arrived, but only because I had made assumptions. I apologize for that. You did not send me away or question my abilities beyond asking about my experience. That puts you ahead of many men I have encountered. Ophelia stood and began clearing the dishes. "Now you should sleep. I will check on the cattle once more before I turn in. I will come with you." Owen rose as well, and she saw the ingrained habit of responsibility reasserting itself. "Owen." She stopped him with a hand on his arm, feeling the solid muscle beneath the worn fabric of his shirt. "I am perfectly capable of walking to the pasture, observing the cattle and walking back. You employed me because I am competent. Let me do my job while you do what you need to do, which is rest." He looked down at her hand on his arm, and something shifted in his expression, a crack in the armor he wore against the world. "I am not accustomed to accepting help or trusting others with things that matter. I understand that. But trust has to start somewhere, and your cattle need you to be rested and clear-headed tomorrow." She squeezed his arm gently and then released it, stepping back to maintain proper distance. "I promise they will still be there in the morning." Owen held her gaze for another moment, then nodded. "6 hours. I will meet you in the kitchen at dawn." Ophelia did make one more check on the cattle, carrying a lantern through the cool night air. Several of the animals had eaten some of the medicated feed, which was encouraging, and a few had drunk water. The truly sick ones stood or lay motionless, but none appeared to have worsened significantly. She spent a few extra minutes with the young heifer she had first examined, stroking her head and speaking softly, and was rewarded with the animal lifting her head slightly and blowing warm breath across Ophelia's hand. It was a small sign of improvement, but she had learned to treasure such moments. When she returned to the house, she found all the lamps extinguished except one left burning low in the kitchen for her, and she smiled at Owen's thoughtfulness. She washed quickly in the cold water from the pitcher, braided her long dark hair for sleep, and lay down in the narrow bed still wearing her chemise. Sleep claimed her quickly despite the unfamiliar surroundings, her body recognizing the opportunity for rest. Owen was indeed in the kitchen at dawn, looking marginally better for the sleep, and they shared a quick breakfast of leftover cornbread and coffee before heading out to check the cattle. The morning brought encouraging news. Several more animals had eaten and drunk during the night, and while 2 cows appeared weaker, none had died. Ophelia prepared another batch of medicated feed while Owen and his hands cleaned the water troughs and refilled them. She showed them how to mix the activated charcoal and tinctures into the grain and molasses mixture, wanting them to be able to continue treatment if she was not available. The pattern continued for 3 days. Ophelia checked the cattle every few hours, adjusted treatments as needed, and monitored each animal's progress carefully. Owen worked alongside her, learning her methods and asking intelligent questions about animal physiology and treatment protocols. They fell into an easy rhythm, communicating with few words but clear understanding. She noticed that he seemed less tense as the cattle began to improve, the hard lines around his eyes softening incrementally. Rosa arrived on the 3rd day, a round Mexican woman in her 60s with shrewd dark eyes and a warm smile. She looked between Ophelia and Owen with undisguised interest, then nodded as if confirming something to herself. "So you are the lady veterinarian. Miguel's wife told me about you. She says you have magic hands with the animals." Her English was lightly accented and perfectly clear. No magic, just training and observation. Ophelia smiled at the friendly woman, "But I appreciate the compliment. You are staying in the upstairs bedroom." Rosa's question was casual, but her eyes were sharp. "Yes, to be near the cattle during treatment. Mr. Harding has been a perfect gentleman." Ophelia met the housekeeper's gaze directly, understanding she was being evaluated. Rosa's smile widened. "I am sure he has. That one has forgotten how to be anything but a gentleman. Maybe he has forgotten how to be a man at all, working all the time and never smiling." She patted Ophelia's arm and bustled toward the kitchen. "I will make a proper meal tonight. You both look too thin." Owen, who had clearly overheard this exchange from the porch, looked embarrassed but did not protest. When Rosa left that evening, the kitchen was stocked with fresh tortillas, a large pot of beef stew, apple pie, and various other provisions. Ophelia and Owen ate together again, and she realized this was becoming her favorite part of the day. With just the two of them in the quiet house, Owen seemed more willing to talk, to let down his guard slightly. "Rosa is right that I work too much," he admitted over the stew. "It is easier than thinking." "What are you avoiding thinking about?" Ophelia knew she was pushing into personal territory, but something in his expression invited the question. Owen was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he said, "That I failed them. My wife Alina and our daughter Emma. I knew Alina was sick, but I thought it was just a fever, nothing serious. By the time I brought the doctor out from town, it was too late. Emma got sick 2 days later, and she was so small, just 8 months old, she did not have the strength to fight it." Ophelia's throat tightened with sympathy. "Fever is unpredictable. It can seem mild and turn deadly in hours. You could not have known." "But I should have. I should have brought the doctor immediately, should have done something more." His hands clenched around his coffee cup. "I built this ranch for them, for our future. And then they were gone, and I was left with this empty house and no reason for any of it. So you keep working because purpose feels better than grief." Ophelia understood this instinct deeply. "I did the same thing after my father died. I took every job I could find, traveled constantly, exhausted myself treating animals from dawn until dark, because if I stopped moving, I would have to face the emptiness." Owen looked at her with surprise. "What changed?" "Time, eventually. And the realization that my father would have been disappointed in me for not living, just existing. He taught me to love this work, but he also taught me to love life itself, to find joy in small things. I was dishonoring his memory by refusing to do that." She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers, a bold gesture, but one that felt right. 5 years is a long time to punish yourself for something that was not your fault. His hand turned under hers, his calloused palm pressing against her smoother one, and the connection felt electric. "I do not know how to stop. Maybe you start by letting yourself feel something again, anything, even if it is uncomfortable." Ophelia's heart was beating faster, and she suddenly realized how close they were leaning across the small table, how his gray-blue eyes had darkened with emotion. Owen's other hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin with unexpected tenderness. "I am feeling something right now. Something I have not felt in years. It terrifies me. I know." Her voice came out as a whisper, but maybe terror means you are still alive. He leaned closer, and she knew he was going to kiss her, wanted him to kiss her with a fierce longing that surprised her. His lips had almost touched hers when a loud crash from outside made them both jump apart. Owen was on his feet immediately, his hand going to the revolver he wore at his hip, and they rushed to the door together. Thomas stood in the yard, breathing hard, his young face panicked. One of the sick cows collapsed. "The big Hereford. Miguel sent me to get you." They ran to the quarantine pasture, Ophelia clutching her medical bag. The Hereford cow lay on her side, breathing in short, labored gasps, her eyes rolling with distress. Ophelia dropped to her knees beside the animal, her personal feelings immediately set aside as professional focus took over. She conducted a rapid examination, listening to the cow's heart and breathing, checking her gums and eyes. Her heart is racing and irregular. The toxins are affecting her cardiac function. "Owen, I need you to hold her head steady. Miguel, Joseph, keep her body still. She may convulse." She worked quickly, administering an injection of digitalis to stabilize the heart rhythm, then a sedative to calm the animal's distress. For 10 agonizing minutes, the outcome hung in the balance, the cow's breathing erratic and her body trembling. Ophelia kept her hands on the animal, monitoring her pulse, talking to her in a low, soothing voice. Owen held the cow's head in his lap, his large hands gentle, his face tense with worry. Finally, gradually, the breathing began to even out. The cow's heart rate slowed to something closer to normal, and the panic faded from her eyes. She was not out of danger, but she was stable. Ophelia sat back on her heels, only then realizing she was shaking with the adrenaline crash. "Will she make it?" Owen asked quietly, still holding the cow's head. "I think so, but it was close. The toxins were more deeply embedded in her system than I realized. She will need constant monitoring tonight." Ophelia looked at him apologetically. "I am sorry, but I need to stay out here with her. Then I will stay too." Owen's tone brooked no argument. "Thomas, bring blankets and more coffee. Miguel, Joseph, you two should get some sleep. We will call if we need help." They sat together through the night beside the sick cow, taking turns monitoring her vital signs and keeping her calm when she grew restless. The temperature dropped significantly, and Owen wrapped one of the blankets around Ophelia's shoulders, his hands lingering for a moment. The almost kiss hung between them, acknowledged but unfinished, and Ophelia found herself hyper-aware of his presence beside her in the darkness. "Tell me about Alina," she said quietly, surprising herself. "If you want to. Sometimes it helps to remember the good things instead of just the end." Owen was silent for so long she thought he would refuse. Then he began to speak, his voice low and a bit rusty, as if these words had been locked away for years. "She had red hair, curly and impossible to tame. She hated it, but I loved it. She laughed easily, made friends with everyone, and she could outshoot most men with a rifle. We met at a barn dance in Texas. I was 23 and thought I knew everything. She was 21 and actually did know everything that mattered. We married 3 months later and came out here to build a life. She sounds wonderful." Ophelia kept her voice gentle, not wanting to break the flow of his memories. She was. And Emma looked just like her, red fuzz on her little head and blue eyes that were already turning green. Alina used to sing to her, these silly made-up songs that made no sense but made Emma smile. His voice cracked slightly. "I have not spoken their names aloud in over a year. Everyone avoids mentioning them, thinking it will upset me, but the silence is worse. It is like they never existed." "They existed. They mattered. They changed you and shaped you, and there is no shame in carrying them in your heart." Ophelia shifted closer, so their shoulders touched. "But you are allowed to keep living too. I think they would want that for you." Owen turned his head to look at her, and in the moonlight his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "How did you get so wise?" "I am not wise. I am just someone who has also loved and lost and survived." She leaned her head against his shoulder, a comfort offered and accepted. "We are both survivors, Owen. Maybe that is why we understand each other." His arm came around her, pulling her closer, and they sat like that for the rest of the night, watching over the cow and taking solace in shared warmth and understanding. By dawn, the Hereford was breathing normally and had even struggled to her feet to drink water. Ophelia checked her thoroughly and declared her on the road to recovery. As they walked back to the house in the early morning light, Owen caught her hand. "Last night, before Thomas interrupted, I was going to kiss you. I know." Ophelia's heart hammered in her chest. "I still want to. But I need you to understand that I have not courted anyone, have not even looked at a woman in 5 years. I do not know how to do this anymore, how to let someone in." His gray-blue eyes searched her face with desperate honesty. "I have never really been courted properly at all. Ophelia admitted. My work has always taken priority, and most men cannot accept that. I will not give up my profession for anyone, Owen. That needs to be clear from the start. I would never ask you to. I have seen your skill, your dedication. You are extraordinary at what you do. He raised their joined hands and kissed her knuckles, a gesture that sent warmth flooding through her. But I also need to move slowly. My heart has been locked away for a long time. Slow is fine. Ophelia smiled up at him. I am not going anywhere until your cattle are fully recovered, which gives us time. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face from handsome to absolutely stunning, and Ophelia felt her heart turn over in her chest. This man, with his wounded soul and gentle strength, was already burrowing into her heart faster than was wise. The next week passed in a haze of hard work and growing affection. The cattle continued to improve steadily, with only one more serious incident that Ophelia managed to resolve. Owen began smiling more often, the grim set of his features softening as hope replaced despair. They talked during meals and while working, sharing stories from their pasts, discussing everything from animal husbandry to politics to their favorite books. Ophelia discovered that Owen had a dry wit that emerged when he was relaxed, and a surprising knowledge of literature for a rancher. My mother was a school teacher, he explained when she expressed surprise at his familiarity with Shakespeare. She made sure I was educated properly, even on a remote Texas ranch. I think she had hopes I would become a lawyer or a professor. Why did you become a rancher instead? Ophelia was genuinely curious. Because I loved the land and the work. There is something honest about ranching, about building something with your own hands and seeing it grow. My father understood, even if my mother was disappointed. Owen looked out over his pastures with unmistakable pride. This ranch is good. The land is fertile, the water is reliable, and I have built something sustainable here. In another 5 years, it will be one of the best operations in the territory. It is already impressive. Ophelia had been observing the ranch's operation carefully, and she recognized quality management and planning. You have a gift for this work, Owen. It is more than just muscle and determination. You understand the animals and the land. So do you. I have been thinking. He turned to look at her intently. When your work here is finished, where will you go? The question landed heavily between them. Ophelia had been avoiding thinking about it, but she knew her time at the Broken H Ranch was drawing to a close. The cattle were recovering well, most were eating and drinking normally, and the critical period had passed. Another few days of monitoring and they would be out of danger. Back to Prescott, I suppose. That is where I have been basing myself, taking calls from throughout the region. What if you stayed here instead? In Camp Verde, I mean. Owen's voice was carefully casual, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. The town needs a veterinarian. The nearest one is in Prescott or Flagstaff, and ranchers are always needing help with their animals. You could establish a proper practice here, maybe even build a clinic eventually. Ophelia's breath caught. Owen, are you asking me to stay because the town needs a veterinarian or because you want me to stay? He turned fully to face her, reaching up to cup her face in both hands. Both. The town does need you, but I need you more. These past 2 weeks, you have brought light back into my life, made me remember what it feels like to look forward to something beyond the next day's work. When I think about you leaving, riding away in a wagon and maybe never coming back, it feels like losing everything all over again. I do not want to leave. The admission burst out of her, raw and honest. I have been dreading the moment when I have to pack my bag and go. But Owen, we have known each other for such a short time. Is this real, or are we both just lonely people who found comfort in each other? Does it matter? His thumbs stroked across her cheekbones with devastating tenderness. Maybe it started as comfort, but what I feel for you now is real. You challenge me, interest me, make me want to be better than I have been. When you smile at me, I feel like I can breathe again after 5 years of suffocating. That is real, Ophelia. I know it is real. I feel it too. Her hands came up to cover his where they cradled her face. When I am with you, I feel like I have found something I did not even know I was looking for. Like I have been wandering and finally came home. Owen kissed her then, finally bridging the distance that had been aching between them for days. His lips were gentle at first, tentative, as if he had forgotten how to do this and was relearning the steps. Ophelia kissed him back, pouring all her growing feelings into the connection, and felt his hesitation melt away. The kiss deepened, became more confident, his arms wrapping around her to pull her close against his solid body. She had been kissed before, brief experiments that had left her unimpressed, but this was entirely different. This was fire and safety combined, passion wrapped in tenderness, and she never wanted it to end. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "Stay, please. I am asking you to stay. Not just as the town veterinarian, though that too. Stay with me. Let me court you properly. Give us a chance to see where this goes." Yes. The answer came easily, feeling right in every fiber of her being. "Yes, I will stay." His smile was brilliant, and he kissed her again, shorter and sweeter this time. "I should warn you that courting might involve me being awkward and forgetting how to act like a normal person. It has been a very long time." Ophelia laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. "I have never been courted at all, so I have no basis for comparison. We can be awkward together." They told Rosa first, when the housekeeper arrived the next day. She took one look at their faces and clasped her hands together with a delighted laugh. "Finally, I told Miguel that you two were perfect for each other. That sad house needs a woman's presence, and that stubborn man needs someone to remind him he is alive." "I am not moving into the house," Ophelia clarified quickly. "Not until we are married, if we get to that point. I will need to find proper lodging in town to maintain my reputation while I establish my practice. There is a small house on 3rd Street that has been empty for months," Rosa said immediately. "It belongs to Senora Martinez, whose son moved to California. She has been wanting to rent it to the right person. It even has a shed that could be converted to a clinic. I will talk to her for you." Everything moved quickly after that. Ophelia sent telegrams to her few contacts informing them of her relocation to Camp Verde. She completed the treatment of Owen's cattle, declaring them fully recovered after another 4 days of monitoring. Owen accompanied her into town to meet with Senora Martinez about the house, and Ophelia secured a reasonable rental agreement for a small but well-maintained adobe cottage with the promised shed. Word spread quickly through the small community that a veterinarian was setting up practice, and even before she had fully moved in, ranchers were stopping by to introduce themselves and discuss their animals' needs. Owen helped her move her few possessions from Prescott and assisted in converting the shed into a functional clinic, building examination tables and storage shelves with his skilled hands. They saw each other every day, sometimes with him finding excuses to come into town, sometimes with her riding out to the ranch on a horse he lent her, a gentle mare named Daisy. He courted her with quiet gestures, bringing her fresh vegetables from Rosa's garden, ensuring her woodpile was always stocked, appearing to help when she needed to treat a particularly large or difficult animal. The town watched their courtship with interest, and for the most part, approval. Owen Harding's grief had been a source of community concern for years, and seeing him smile again, seeing him walk down the street with Ophelia on his arm, brought genuine happiness to Camp Verde's residents. There were a few disapproving voices, older women who thought the courtship was too fast or that Ophelia was too unconventional, but they were drowned out by general goodwill. 2 months after Ophelia's arrival, Owen took her on a picnic to a beautiful spot along the Verde River where cottonwood trees provided shade, and the water ran clear and cold over smooth stones. They ate Rosa's cooking and talked about everything and nothing, comfortable in each other's presence. As the afternoon sun slanted golden through the leaves, Owen took her hands in his. "I know it has only been a few months. I know by conventional standards we should wait longer, but I wasted 5 years not living, not feeling, and I do not want to waste any more time." He drew a deep breath. "Ophelia Morgan, will you marry me? Will you share this life with me, build a future together, and let me spend every day trying to be worthy of you?" Tears sprang to Ophelia's eyes, but they were happy tears. "Yes, absolutely yes, I love you, Owen Harding. I think I started falling in love with you that first night when you trusted me enough to rest, when you let me see past the armor you wear. I love you too. You healed more than my cattle. You healed parts of me I thought were dead forever." He slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "I do not have anything fancy, but this has been in my family for 3 generations. It is perfect." Ophelia admired the worn gold, touched by the gesture of trust in giving her a family heirloom. "When should we marry?" "As soon as possible." Owen's smile was boyishly hopeful. "Unless you want a big wedding with months of planning. I want to marry you and start our life together. Everything else is just details." Ophelia kissed him, and the kiss quickly grew heated, both of them eager for the intimacy that marriage would allow. They married 3 weeks later in Camp Verde's small church, with Rosa crying happily in the front pew and Owen's ranch hands serving as witnesses alongside several of Ophelia's new clients from town. Ophelia wore a simple but lovely blue dress that Rosa had helped her select from the general store, and Owen wore a new suit that made him look devastatingly handsome. The ceremony was brief and traditional, but when Owen kissed her as his wife, Ophelia felt the rightness of it in her soul. The ranch house that had been so empty and austere began to transform into a real home. Ophelia brought her books and a few small treasures from her previous life. Together, they selected new curtains and a comfortable sofa for the front room. She hung herbs in the kitchen for drying, both for cooking and for her veterinary preparations. Owen began smiling regularly, his laughter becoming a common sound in the house. They worked together easily, Owen often helping with her more difficult veterinary cases, while she learned the intricacies of ranch management and began advising him on herd health optimization. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. Ophelia struggled initially with balancing her practice and helping on the ranch, and they had several arguments about her pushing herself too hard, working from dawn until late into the night. Owen had moments when his grief would resurface unexpectedly, triggered by a memory or a date on the calendar, and he would withdraw into himself until Ophelia gently pulled him back. But they learned to communicate, to be honest about their needs and fears, and each challenge they weathered together made their bond stronger. Rosa remained a constant presence, now more friend than employee, delighted to see the ranch house filled with life and laughter again. She taught Ophelia family recipes and shared stories about Owen as a young husband, clearly thrilled to have a woman to talk to. Miguel, Thomas, and Joseph treated Ophelia with respect and affection, grateful to see their boss happy and recognizing that her veterinary expertise benefited the entire ranch operation. Ophelia's practice thrived beyond her expectations. She became known throughout the region for her skill and dedication, ranchers willing to pay her higher fees because she got results. She hired a young man named Peter as an apprentice, a 16-year-old from Camp Verde who was fascinated by animal medicine and willing to learn. Training him reminded her of her own father, and she found satisfaction in passing knowledge to the next generation. On their first anniversary, Owen surprised her with a beautiful examination room addition to her clinic, built with space and light and modern equipment ordered from the East. "You have brought so much to my life," he told her as she stood in the new space, tears streaming down her face. "I wanted to give you something that showed how much I believe in your work and in you. You have given me everything," Ophelia managed through her tears. "A home, a partnership, love. I never imagined I could be this happy." Their second year of marriage brought new joy. Ophelia discovered she was pregnant in late winter. She had been feeling tired and queasy for weeks before she recognized the symptoms, so accustomed to ignoring her own body in favor of her work. When she told Owen, his face went through a complex series of emotions. Joy, terror, and grief all flickering across his features before settling into cautious happiness. "I am scared," he admitted, holding her hands tightly. "After what happened with Alina and Emma, the thought of going through that again, of maybe losing you, I am healthy and strong," Ophelia interrupted gently. "And I am a doctor, even if not of human medicine. I know the signs of trouble to watch for. We will be careful, and we will get through this together." Owen was overprotective throughout her pregnancy, trying to prevent her from working too hard or taking any risks. They argued about it more than once, Ophelia insisting she was perfectly capable of continuing her practice while he worried constantly. Finally, Rosa intervened with practical wisdom. "Let her work, you stubborn man. She will go crazy sitting around the house, and bored women are dangerous. Just make sure she has help with the heavy lifting and does not overdo it." Ophelia compromised by training Peter to handle more of the routine work, while she focused on consultations and more complex cases. She continued working until a week before her due date, only stopping when she could no longer comfortably ride a horse. The entire town seemed invested in the pregnancy, people stopping by to offer advice and baby items, thrilled that the Hardings were starting a family. The labor was long and difficult, nearly 20 hours that tested both Ophelia's strength and Owen's sanity. The doctor from Camp Verde attended, along with Rosa and a midwife, while Owen paced the downstairs and prayed harder than he had in years. When the baby finally arrived at dawn, a healthy boy with a powerful set of lungs, Owen was called upstairs to meet his son. Ophelia would never forget the expression on his face as he looked at their baby, wonder and terror and overwhelming love all mixed together. "He is perfect," Owen whispered, tears running unashamedly down his face. "You are perfect. Thank you. Thank you for this gift. What should we name him?" Ophelia was exhausted but happier than she had ever been, watching her strong husband cradle their tiny son with infinite gentleness. "I was thinking Thomas after my father, but only if you agree." Owen looked at her, seeking approval. "Thomas Owen Harding, I love it." Ophelia smiled at both of them, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. The baby brought new challenges and new joys. Owen was a devoted father from the start, getting up for nighttime feedings, walking the floor with Thomas when he fussed, and changing diapers without complaint. Watching the man she loved with their son made Ophelia fall in love with him all over again. He had been so afraid of failing another child, but his love for Thomas was fearless and complete. Ophelia returned to work gradually when Thomas was 2 months old, at first just a few hours a day and only for cases near home. Rosa happily watched the baby while Ophelia worked, and Owen would often come in from the ranch to check on his son throughout the day. Peter proved himself a capable assistant, handling more responsibilities and showing real talent for veterinary medicine. Thomas was 6 months old when a telegram arrived that changed their lives again. It was from a veterinary college in Kansas, one of the few institutions beginning to consider female students. They had heard of Ophelia's work through professional journals, where she had published articles on cattle toxicology and range management health. The telegram offered her admission to their program, a chance to earn an official degree and credentials that would allow her to practice anywhere in the country without question. Ophelia stared at the telegram for a long time, emotions warring inside her. This opportunity represented validation of everything she had worked for, a chance to legitimize her expertise in the eyes of the medical establishment. But it would mean leaving Camp Verde, leaving her practice and her clients, leaving Owen and Thomas for nearly 2 years while she completed the program. She showed Owen the telegram that evening after dinner, watching his face as he read it. He was quiet for a long time, and she could see him struggling with his own feelings. Finally, he looked at her steadily. "This is what you have always wanted, is it not? Official recognition of your skills. Part of me wants it," Ophelia admitted, "but I have built a good life here. I have you and Thomas, a thriving practice, a community that respects my work. Would a diploma really change anything important? That is a decision only you can make." Owen set down the telegram and took her hands. "But I want you to know that if you decide to go, I will support you. Thomas and I will be here when you return, and your practice will be waiting. 2 years is a long time, but we can survive it if that is what you truly want." Ophelia thought about it for 3 days, weighing her options carefully. She discussed it with Rosa, who told her that education was never wasted and that the ranch would survive her absence. She talked to several of her clients, who universally expressed disappointment at the thought of losing her, but understood the opportunity. She spent long hours watching Owen with Thomas, thinking about missing 2 years of their son's early life. In the end, the decision came down to what would make her happiest. She realized that she no longer needed external validation of her worth. She knew she was a skilled veterinarian. Her results proved it every day. The respect of her clients and the support of her community meant more than any diploma from a distant institution. And the thought of leaving Owen and Thomas, of missing precious time with her family, felt fundamentally wrong. She telegraphed her decline to the college with gratitude but firm resolve, and felt nothing but peace with the decision. When she told Owen, his relief was visible, though he tried to hide it. "You are certain? I meant what I said about supporting you if you wanted to go." "I am certain. My life is here, with you and Thomas and the work I love. I do not need a diploma to prove my worth, not anymore." Ophelia kissed him softly. "You taught me that. You believed in me from the start, even when I was just a woman who showed up unexpectedly to treat your cattle. That belief means more than any credential." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Thomas grew into a bright, curious toddler who loved animals and followed his mother around whenever she worked at the ranch. Ophelia's practice continued to expand, and she eventually hired a second assistant, a young woman named Catherine who wanted to learn veterinary medicine despite societal disapproval. Training another woman felt like coming full circle, passing on the opportunities Ophelia had been given. Owen's ranch prospered, becoming recognized as one of the best cattle operations in the territory. He and Ophelia worked as true partners, her veterinary expertise helping him maintain exceptional herd health, while his business acumen and management skills created a sustainable operation. They purchased additional land and expanded the herd carefully, never overextending but always looking toward the future. When Thomas was 3, Ophelia became pregnant again. This time, Owen was less fearful, having seen her come through the first pregnancy safely, though he still fretted over her constantly in his quiet way. Their daughter arrived on a crisp autumn morning, smaller and quieter than Thomas had been, with her father's gray-blue eyes and her mother's dark hair. They named her Elena Rose Harding, honoring Owen's first wife while giving their daughter her own identity. Owen held his daughter with tears streaming down his face. "Thank you," he whispered to Ophelia. "Thank you for not being afraid of her name, for understanding that remembering Elena does not diminish what we have. You loved her. She was part of making you who you are. Our daughter should know that she is named after someone special, someone brave enough to build a life in a hard land." Ophelia touched her husband's face gently. "Love is not finite, Owen. We can honor the past while celebrating the present." Elena proved to be a calm, observant baby who rarely cried and seemed content to watch the world with serious eyes. Thomas was initially uncertain about the new arrival but quickly became a devoted big brother, always wanting to help care for his baby. Rosa declared both children perfect and spoiled them shamelessly, knitting endless sweaters and blankets and always having treats in her pockets. The years passed in a blur of busy, happy days. Thomas showed an interest in ranching, following Owen everywhere, and asking endless questions about cattle and horses and land management. Elena surprised everyone by displaying a fascination with her mother's veterinary work, carefully observing treatments and asking why Ophelia did specific things. By the time she was 5, Elena could identify common animal ailments and knew how to handle small creatures gently. "I think we might be raising another veterinarian," Owen observed one evening as they watched Elena carefully bandage a chicken's injured leg under Ophelia's supervision. "Would that bother you?" Ophelia asked, curious about his reaction to the possibility of their daughter following such an unconventional path. "Bother me? I would be proud." Owen smiled, watching their children with obvious affection. "You have shown that women can excel at anything they set their minds to. If Elena wants to be a veterinarian, she will have the best teacher in the territory. And if she wants to do something else entirely, we will support that too." Camp Verde grew and changed over the years, but the Hardings remained central to the community. Ophelia served on the school board and helped establish a small library. Owen was elected to the territorial council, representing ranching interests with integrity and thoughtfulness. Their home was always open to neighbors and friends, Rosa's cooking feeding countless guests over the years. When Thomas turned 18, he took over more responsibility for the ranch, working alongside his father as a true partner. He had grown into a fine young man, tall like Owen, but with his mother's quick intelligence and warm smile. Elena, at 15, was already apprenticing formally with Ophelia, displaying natural talent and dedication to veterinary medicine. Catherine, Ophelia's former assistant, had established her own practice in a neighboring town, and the two women consulted regularly on difficult cases. Owen was 47 now, his dark hair liberally streaked with silver, and Ophelia was 42, with fine lines around her eyes from years of squinting in the Arizona sun. But they were happy and healthy, still deeply in love after nearly 20 years of marriage. They still worked together daily, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still kissed like newlyweds when they thought the children were not watching. On their 20th anniversary, Owen took Ophelia back to the spot along the Verde River where he had proposed. The cottonwood trees were larger now, the river still clear and cold and beautiful. They sat together on a blanket, watching the water flow past, comfortable in the silence of two people who knew each other completely. "You ever regret it?" Owen asked quietly. "Staying here instead of pursuing formal credentials, marrying a grieving rancher, choosing this life?" Ophelia turned to look at him, this man who had healed her lonely heart just as she had healed his. Not for a single moment. "This life, our family, our work together, it is everything I never knew I wanted. You gave me a home, Owen, not just a house, but a place where I belong completely. You saved me." Owen's voice was rough with emotion. "I was just existing, going through the motions, waiting to die. You reminded me what it meant to live, to feel, to hope. Every good thing in my life for the past 20 years started the day you arrived to heal my sick cattle. And stayed to heal your lonely heart," Ophelia finished, smiling at the memory of their beginning. "Though I think we healed each other." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of 20 years of love and partnership. When they pulled apart, his eyes were bright with tears and joy. "Here is to the next 20 years, Dr. Harding. To the next 20 years and all the years after that." Ophelia leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the river flow and feeling completely, perfectly content. Their children grew and found their own paths. Thomas eventually married a schoolteacher named Sarah, a kind woman who loved ranch life and gave Ophelia and Owen 3 grandchildren. Eleanor pursued veterinary medicine with fierce determination, eventually traveling to that Kansas college that had once offered her mother admission. She returned 2 years later with her official degree and worked alongside Ophelia for several years before establishing her own practice in Flagstaff, bringing modern veterinary medicine to an even larger territory. The Broken H Ranch continued to prosper under Owen's management, and then under Thomas's, as Owen gradually stepped back from daily operations. Owen and Ophelia never fully retired, both too dedicated to their work to stop completely. But they found more time for simple pleasures, reading together in the evenings, taking long rides through the countryside, spoiling their grandchildren outrageously. Rosa remained part of their lives until her peaceful death at 83, having seen the sad, empty ranch house transform into a home filled with love and laughter. As they aged, Ophelia and Owen were often asked to tell the story of how they met, and they never tired of sharing it. Young veterinarians sought Ophelia's advice and mentorship, inspired by her success and dedication. Young ranchers consulted Owen about sustainable land management and ethical animal treatment. Together, they had built something lasting, not just in terms of property and profession, but in the lives they had touched and the love they had shared. On their 40th anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, Owen raised a glass of wine and offered a toast. "To the woman who came to heal my sick cattle and stayed to heal my lonely heart. You made me believe in second chances, in love, in the possibility of joy after grief. You have been my partner, my love, and my best friend for 40 incredible years. Here is to 40 more." "I could not ask for 40 more," Ophelia said with a laugh, squeezing his hand. "But I will happily take whatever time we have left as long as we face it together." They lived well into their 70s, active and engaged until the very end. When Owen finally passed peacefully in his sleep at 77, Ophelia grieved deeply, but without regret. They had built a beautiful life together, had loved each other fiercely and well, and had created a legacy that would continue through their children and grandchildren. She lived another 3 years after Owen's death, continuing to consult on difficult veterinary cases and delighting in her growing family. When her own time came, she went peacefully, surrounded by love, her last words a whispered, "I am coming, Owen." They were buried together on a hill overlooking the Broken H Ranch, under a large oak tree that provided shade and comfort. Their headstone was simple: Owen and Ophelia Harding, partners in life, love, and legacy. But everyone who knew their story understood that those simple words contained a lifetime of meaning, a testament to how two lonely people found each other in the Arizona territory and built something extraordinary together. Thomas continued the ranch for many years before passing it to his own children, and the Broken H remained in the family for generations, always remembered as the place where a female veterinarian came to treat sick cattle and ended up healing a grieving cowboy's heart. Aliner's veterinary practice grew into a small teaching hospital, training new generations of veterinarians and carrying on her mother's legacy of excellence and compassion. The story of Owen and Ophelia became part of Camp Verde's history, told and retold as an example of how love could heal even the deepest wounds, how two strong people could build something lasting together, and how sometimes the best things in life happened when you were brave enough to ask someone to stay. Their great-grandchildren grew up hearing stories about the grandmother who defied convention to pursue veterinary medicine, and the grandfather who rebuilt his life after tragedy. Those stories inspired new generations to be brave, to work hard, to love deeply, and to never give up on the possibility of happiness even after devastating loss. The Broken H Ranch still stood strong. The Verde River still flowed clear and cold, and the cottonwood trees still provided shade for young lovers who came to carve their initials and dream of futures as bright as the one Owen and Ophelia had built together. In the end, theirs was a simple story of love and healing, of two people who found each other when they needed it most and chose to build a life together despite challenges and conventions. It was a story of hard work and dedication, of partnership and respect, of grief transformed into joy and lonely hearts made whole. It was the kind of love story that the Wild West was built on, practical and passionate, tender and tough, full of struggle and triumph and enduring affection. And it was a story that proved, beyond any doubt, that sometimes the best things in life happened when a cowboy was brave enough to ask a woman to stay, and when that woman was brave enough to say yes.